Welcome to the Inside Scoop Live podcast, where indie authors get personal about their books, their writing, and their passions. I'm your host, Sherry Hoyt. Join me for some lively conversations with debut indie authors and seasoned veterans alike. It's a great place to find your next amazing read or even get inspired. So sit back and enjoy the show and let me know what you think. Hi, everyone. Cindy Lee Neighbors joins the show today to talk about her powerful memoir, Too Much. Her story takes us from the bright promise of medical school through a harrowing descent into addiction and mental illness, ultimately emerging as a whistleblower who found healing through her own words. Before we get started, here's the inside scoop on the author. Dr. Cindy Lee Neighbors is a retired U.S. Army physician and writer whose work centers on mental health advocacy. Her debut memoir, Too Much, chronicles her experiences navigating mental health challenges in a toxic work environment within military medicine. She's also a passionate children's book author, with her debut title, Benji and Brianna Become Booger Doctors, and the creator of the coloring book series, Adventures in Surgery Land. Cindy's mission is to inspire others to overcome diversity and find their voice through storytelling. You can learn more about Cindy and her work at cindyleeneighbors.com. Well, hi, Cindy. Welcome to Inside Scoop Live.
Hi, Sherry. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to talking with you. So tell us about your new book and memoir, Too Much. What is it about, and what inspired you to share your story?
Right. So, Too Much is about my time in residency mainly. There are some flashbacks in my childhood, but it focuses on my mental health challenges while I was a surgical resident at Triple Army Medical Center.
Okay. And what inspired you to share your story? What made you decide to write a book about your experiences?
So, I really felt it was important to break the stigma and the cycle of feeling the shame and embarrassment with mental health struggles. I was in rehab for a while, in and out, and met kind of a lot of other people who had similar problems to me, and just felt a lot of comfort and solace in meeting people with similar paths, and also just kind of felt it was discouraging in a way that there were so many people who felt shamed for having their problems. And I found a lot of comfort in writing in my journals, and that it was quite easy for me to write my thoughts and feelings. And if I could just compile all of this into a story that would resonate with a lot of people, that not only would it maybe help me with my journey, that maybe it could reach a handful of other people too.
Yeah, I think memoirs like yours are so important because when people are struggling, whether it's substance addiction or a physical ailment or something else, they often feel like they're alone. But books like yours help spread the word and show them that they're not the only ones going through it. So thank you. Thank you for writing your story and sharing it with others.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Now, your memoir opens on a Hawaiian beach, a moment of reflection, kind of amid the chaos. Why did you begin at this particular point in time?
I thought it was a good turning point in my journey. It features a moment of clarity amidst all the turmoil I was facing, and it was a symbolic representation of finding peace in a way. Also, the ocean itself serves as this recurrent motif, if you will, throughout the book. Hawaii is where I grew up and where the majority of the story takes place. And so the ocean was a really powerful theme throughout the book. It symbolizes so much with my journey, with transformation, with, shedding so much of my past and looking back, looking forward, kind of this growth cycle of life. And if we want to talk about I hate the word addiction, but we want to talk about that in this cleansing process. I went to the ocean so much and walked on the beach so much looking for answers. And there were so many moments where I just felt so lost that I would just sit on the beach and just watch the waves. And that was always just a place I could go to when I was looking for answers. And many times I didn't find them, but I would go and I would write there a lot with just like my pad and pen, or in between writing sessions on my computer as well, and just kind of stare at the ocean and wonder what's going on. Or I would just kind of go and sit and cry too when I wasn't writing. And I would just take long walks on the beach alone. So there's just so much that the ocean and the beach did for me. I felt it was important to just open up and kind of almost give my thanks to what the ocean has always provided for me. It's also just this universal place that people can relate to, right?
Mm-hmm.
I feel like no matter where you are living in the world, at least you can imagine a beach.
Yeah, I love the story behind where you opened your memoir at. It's beautiful. And yeah, you hit it on the head. The ocean is it's a great place for reflection and renewal, like you mentioned. I love that.
Hmm.
Was there one factor that played a big role in your struggles, or kind of was it a combination of things that led to a point where something had to change?
It was definitely a combination of things, multifactorial for sure. And it was just like, one thing leading to the next. And then you kind of talk about the cherry on top. What was that awakening or that final moment, looking
Mm,
back? And people ask me that question, like, what was your breaking point? And I try to build that story in that way where the main character, sometimes I talk about that main character in the third person, reaches this tipping point, where everything just comes to an end, if you will.
yeah. Of course, it's been said that you have to want help in order
Mm.
for it to be effective. And if you're not ready for that help, then it probably won't be as effective, maybe, unless you hit that point, that breaking point. I wonder how effective treatment would be, if
I
that makes
totally,
sense. Yeah.
yes, I agree with that. It's like that saying we talk about, bringing the horse to the water, right?
Mm. Yeah. You
Uh,
can't make them
and
drink, right?
and we see that in Western medicine with all kinds of patients and medicines, and we can talk all day about that with general health care and talking about diet and exercise. And I think the concept is analogous for mental health and addiction and drugs and everything in everyday life. So I think there's something to take away for all of us with that.
Yeah.
Ultimately, with medicine and healthcare, at the end of the day, you can go and seek answers from others, but it's really you that is your own greatest doctor or healer, is what I've found personally.
That makes sense. Because you can go to the doctor and they can tell you what to do, but then it's your
Mhm.
responsibility as to whether you're going to carry that out or not. Now, you use flashbacks throughout the narrative to reveal key moments from the past. How did you determine what to include and where to place those scenes?
So I owe a lot of that to my developmental editor, Mary Cole. She was so integral in helping me kind of establish the bones and framework of this book.
Mm,
I met her virtually a few years ago when I came up with a concept for this book, and I was just in a really low place of my life. I was being targeted and harassed by people in my program, and I really set out to make this kind of like a burn book, if you will, not to sound so cliche and like a Mean Girls thing, but my head was in a different place, and it was really nice to have an outsider and a professional, quite frankly, who was like, no, you don't write books for this reason. And she, though, was fascinated by the story. And I was grateful for that. And she really was really good at teaching me how you weave in context and background to develop characters. Obviously, this was a true story, but she helped me figure out to do it in such a way that, so maybe it read like fiction, because she helped me kind of create that backstory by saying, like, okay, we need to talk about, your upbringing, your childhood. And I kept asking her, like, why? That doesn't make any sense. Like, I
mm,
don't want to go back and talk about, when I was growing up and my mom and dad. Like, that's so personal and intimate, Mary. Like, this is weird. This is embarrassing. I really don't want to talk about my dad. He's dead. Like, sure, I can talk about when he died, but why are
mm.
we going to talk about when I was growing up with him? And she's like, well, that's why it matters. And then when I read it back, like, I would write her scenes and then she'd kind of tuck them into places. I'd be like, oh, that makes sense. It deepens things, like, why do you care?
Yeah. I
And
love that. Yeah.
yeah. So it reminded me of watching some of my favorite movies when you have those flashbacks, and I was like, oh, okay. And sometimes I read it, I was like, oh, this reads like some of my favorite screenplays, which makes a lot of sense. So we would work together back and forth, because I always kind of wanted the concept to have flashbacks, but I never thought it would have flashbacks from really early in my childhood. So we definitely kind of worked together back and forth on that.
What a great experience you had, and a wonderful editor, it sounds like.
Oh,
Amazing.
yes. So amazing. And she, was there for me in some really dark times too, because this book took me a while. Quite frankly, I was going through rehab and ups and downs and things with my program. So I would take breaks, and, I was scared at one point that I wasn't going to finish. And I said to her, hey, if anything happens to me, like, I die, quite frankly, I was like, I need you to finish this book for me.
Oh,
I
wow.
can't imagine how she must have felt to have that kind of message sent to her in an email. I was very manic, I was depressed, I was on meds. There were times when I didn't show up to the Zoom meeting and she didn't hear from me for like a week. And she was like, I was very worried about you. We established a really intimate professional relationship, if you
Hmm.
will. And so at the end, I was like, I'm so grateful to you because you did more for me than like so many doctors ever did.
Wow. That kind of gives me chills.
But it's crazy how we talk about catharsis and in writing a book, and it's crazy how much that did for me. And I never knew what that would be like until actually releasing the book.
How difficult was it to decide what to share and what to leave out of the book?
That was extremely challenging. I did have to sacrifice some scenes. Initially, Mary screened some of those. She's like, that's not going to go in there. And I was like, why? And she's like, well, one, this story is about you and not so and so and so and so. And I'd have to be like, okay. So she was really, really good. She's been doing this for many years. And so I trusted her expertise. And I'd be like, all right, we're going to cut out, this, raunchy scene about so-and-so's, blah, blah, blah. And
Yeah.
at the end, I realized she's like, because this doesn't push the story forward, and so it would always come to that. Does this move the story forward? And I'd
Hmm.
be like, shoot, this is juicy, but she's right. It doesn't move the story forward. And so those were the hardest ones to cut, you know.
Yeah, those are the things you set aside and you fictionalize and put it in a fiction novel.
Right. So yeah, I have graveyard snippets of things that, didn't make it. And let's see, other things were kind of privacy related. It was just sensitive content for either other characters or people who I knew. It was just like, again, she's like, doesn't need to be in here. The story is strong without these details. And so it wasn't necessarily that it didn't move the story forward, but it was like, this is not necessary to include for, privacy reasons. So it was a lot of like snipping.
Yeah. You mentioned doing it for yourself and to
Mm.
help others. Was it mostly cathartic to put everything down on paper, or was it painful, or both?
It was definitely both. It sounds fun to write, like, oh yeah, I've always wanted to be a writer and it's such an amazing thing, but it's honestly kind of a painful process. It's like a labor of love.
Hmm.
I love writing and being a writer and the concept of writing way more, by the way, than being a surgeon, because I kind of liked being a surgeon. It's fun to do things with my hands and creating things and fixing things. But I love being a writer and creating stories and storytelling, but it's painful. It's like a puzzle. And when it comes to personal stories and reliving really painful memories, I think that's the hard part.
Mm.
I think the catharsis comes from being able to have this reckoning with these painful memories. And forgiveness is such a tough concept for me because it's like they say you'll forgive, but you'll never forget. And for me, I have such an astonishing memory. I can remember scenes so vividly in my mind. It's like a movie. I can play them back over and over and over again. And I think that's a problem with traumatic events is the more you replay them, the more it actually like imprints them in your mind and it's like
Hmm.
recurrent PTSD. So it's not necessarily a healthy process to like rewrite a scene like 50 times. It's like, whoa, I actually just gave myself PTSD through this exercise. But
Yeah.
if you kind of do it in a healthy way, maybe you can link a positive memory. So it's like, well, that wasn't so bad. So it sounds weird, but I've tried my best to link this all with a positive experience. And I'm not trying to say it in this new term, toxic positivity kind of way,
Mm-hmm.
but just try to heal from it all and be like, everybody has traumatic experiences in life. That's what life is, I guess. Nobody has a perfect life, but to just make the most of it and not to dismiss it and like, and it is what it is kind of a way, but just to learn from it and try to move forward in all of my future interactions, and try to learn how to communicate better with people and recognizing that I was wrong in many of my circumstances and experiences So were others. And how can I actually be a better person in the future?
Wow. Yeah. I guess looking back on all that and your experiences, was there a single event that might have changed your path? Or do you feel like your journey was shaped by kind of a series of choices?
I believe my path has been shaped by a series of choices. I think there's an excerpt in the very end of the book where I talk about how life is a succession of choices. I believe, there's so many individual choices and external factors that influence my path, and there's this interconnectedness, how seemingly small choices can have this ripple effect leading to significant outcomes.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I love the title. It fits with the
Oh,
book.
thank you.
It just fits. I mean, the idea of too much, it just runs throughout the book. Too smart, too self destructive, too intense. Has that perception shifted over time for you, or is that still something that resonates?
Well, it's something that I try to let go of more and more every day.
Mm.
Because when I find myself feeling like, man, I'm too much or this is too much, I try not to get annoyed with myself now. I'm like, it's not, and I'm not. We can do this, me, myself, and I, or I got this, or I can, find a way through this. Nothing is ever too much, and I'm not ever too much. And I can always find a way to fit in or get through a difficult challenge or process, my emotions. Because I think with what I've been diagnosed with bipolar disorder, what's challenging for me are managing the emotions. And
Mm.
so that's kind of the title, Too Much. Like, I can be seen as too much or too this or too that, or being, the emotions, being on the spectrum of being too, loud and too aggressive. And you're just always that extreme emotion,
Mm.
always seen as that extreme personality, right? But sometimes, that can be a good thing if you channel it in the right ways. Some of, our most creative people in the world arguably have been diagnosed with bipolar disorder
Mm-hmm.
and can still contribute in a meaningful way if they're championed and encouraged, and sadly we see that's with my mental health advocacy. We see people who are diagnosed with mental health problems sometimes stigmatized and bullied, and that can go really south. People can resort to violence when that happens,
Mm-hmm.
and isolation. And I would argue that some of those people who are very intelligent resort to doing really terrible things to society if they're not kind of encouraged to be part of society. And
Mm.
so that's kind of my campaign is, when we see people like that, rather than bullying them and making them feel like they don't belong, maybe try to encourage them to be themselves and find a way where they can use their differences to, channel whatever superpower they do have so that they can contribute in a meaningful way, because they will find a way to do something, and they might choose good or they might choose evil. And that's what's scary, I think, about some of these people. And that's
Yeah.
why I wrote the book, because I can relate to that. Feeling like you're too much, feeling like you can do something, wanting to make a difference and wanting to fit in. And then you're kind of at that fork in the road where you choose, like, am I going to do something really effective, good, and powerful in a good way? Or am I going to do something really awful and evil in a bad way?
Mm. Yeah. Becoming a whistleblower marked a major shift in your journey. How did speaking out alter your path going forward?
That was really tough for me at first because I felt like I was betraying my program.
Mm.
And I wasn't doing it for the reasons of being a good person. I'm going to be completely honest with you. I was on this path of vengeance. At the time, I was in my heightened, if we want to call it a manic state or whatever state. I was very agitated. I'll put it that way. I was very triggered. My intentions were not clear. And so when I sent all those emails, I write about it in the book, I was kind of one of those people where I was really unpredictable, which I think that's also why I wrote about it, to like recognize the red flags in somebody you work with. And you're like, hey, if you kind of see someone acting like this, rather than continue to trigger them and bully them and make it really toxic, like offer support, because you just never know what direction that person's going to go in.
Yeah.
So becoming a whistleblower, I think, is a red flag if you do it in the way I did. But after a while, looking back now, I'm trying to be reflective about it, of course. I think it's a good way for me to kind of reclaim my narrative and find strength in the vulnerability I still have here.
Yeah. Well, and also talk about reaching a turning point in outpatient therapy. And that kind of set you on a different path, the path to kind of rebuilding your life. What made that experience different from previous attempts at recovery?
That's a great question. There was a point where I just knew I wasn't going to get it back. My career, I had become a whistleblower. I had openly admitted to recreationally abusing prescription drugs.
Mm.
And I was basically told I was being terminated from my surgical residency program.
Oh, wow.
So, I had hit that what we call classic rock bottom label we were kind of referencing earlier in our discussion. And so I didn't really have any other option other than to turn my life around.
Yeah.
And I hate to say it, but once you do become a whistleblower against, I kind of want to say the government at this point, because the hospital I worked for is affiliated with the government, you really don't have many options. You
Mm.
know,
Yeah.
you really don't. So people ask if I self-sabotage, and I don't know. I'll never know why all of this led up to a point. Maybe, deep down inside, I was just so unhappy. I was just so miserable. I could speculate all day, but at the end, it's not going to do anything for me to kind of speculate so much and look back and try to make sense of it all. I tried to do that already through writing the book. You know
Right.
what I mean? But I'm grateful that I did end up in that rehab program because they did so much for me. It required when I was in it to be completely sober. So I did get off of using those prescription medications. The reason why I think prescription medications are so dangerous is because they're easy to obtain. For me, they were free. I had an insurance that covered it, and I was working in a hospital. So when people give feedback on the book saying I'm in disbelief that she was able to access all of that, well, if you work in a hospital and you can hop over to, a doctor to prescribe them, they're actually pretty easy to get. And when they're free, you know, I
Yeah.
hate to say
Yeah.
it, and when your fellow doctors are working 80 hours a week, they don't really blink an eye when you ask for a prescription.
Wow.
It's
Yeah.
hard to believe, but I wrote this story because it's important for people to kind of wake up and see that, once you get on this slippery slope of popping Adderall all the time, and then you got to go to sleep at night, so you take Klonopin, and it's really a nightmare. And I know there's a lot of other people out there who do this. It's not healthy, obviously. So I was literally just doing coffee, Adderall, Klonopin, alcohol. I went into psychosis.
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't eating regular food. I wasn't sleeping. And then I was seeing patients. I was operating.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
It was a pretty scary situation.
Mm.
It just kind of shows that this stuff can happen,
Yeah. To anybody.
right? To anybody. I'm glad that I ended up in the rehab where I did, because then I got off everything. It was
Yeah.
very difficult.
Yeah. What do you hope readers take away from your book, Too Much?
That everybody has their own challenges and unique struggles in life, and we're all human. We're all going through it.
Yeah.
We're all different, but at the end, what if we're all actually just the same?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. We're all on a journey. Yeah. If there was a chance to go back and speak to your younger self at the start of your journey, what would you say to yourself?
Not to be too hard on myself.
Yeah. It sounds simple, but I know it's not. But it's
I
good
know.
advice.
And I think we all probably suffer from that at one point or another in our lives. To
Absolutely.
just take it a little more easy one day at a time. Just life is tough as it is. So just to kind of be a little bit kinder to ourselves.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I wanted to congratulate you on Too Much. You received one of our Reader Views Literary Awards for the 2024 program. So, congratulations on that.
Thank you
And
so much.
yeah, it's exciting. What's next for you moving forward? Will you write another book like Too Much? Are you expanding into other things? What's next for you?
Yes, I'm hoping to write fiction. Actually, Too Much, I think, was tough for me to write memoir. And maybe someday in several years down the road, I'd love to write a more reflective type of memoir. This was done in a way, I want to, dare I say, it was a little bit of an experimental memoir, especially towards the end with the writing. I cut out a lot of this typically we see reflection in memoir, and I wanted to do a little more of like straightforward writing with this. So with my next piece, I'd really love to just try to do a very straightforward commercial fictional novel,
Mm,
which sounds really tough. It's like, it sounds like it'd be really easy to just do something normal. It's going to be so tough. And I want to challenge myself to do like a commercially successful piece.
yeah. It sounds like fun to me. I think you'll enjoy it after your recent project. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
this was tough because you're trying to kind of sway people to read something that's super different and challenges the norms in many ways. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
And this is my debut piece. And so it's just been so exhausting that I really look forward to trying something a little more conventional.
Yeah. Tell us about your children's book. You also have a children's book out. That sounds
Yes.
exciting.
Yes. And that one's a little different too. It's quirky. It's called Benji and Brianna Become Booger Doctors.
I love
I
that.
actually, thank you. I started that in residency and it took a long time because finding a publisher and an illustrator was, a feat. And then again, I had to take some breaks because of all my mental health issues. So that was supposed to be published a little while ago. And then there were some delays due to me being in and out of rehab, but they've been so kind, Mascot Books, and understanding of everything, and even really cool about my memoir, which they've read. So they're super supportive in that regard. And
Nice.
everything. Yeah. So it just rolled out, and the hardcover edition is going to be released in 2 months.
Wonderful. That's exciting. Yeah.
Yeah, it's on Kindle now. And then I just did a thing to have an audiobook version of it, just so like kids can have it read out loud to them on Kindle, which is kind of a new exploration there, like an audiobook of a children's book. I know it's only like a few minutes, but we'll see.
Oh, that sounds
Um,
fun. Yeah.
I
Yeah.
know. And then I'm going all out with this. And then a coloring book spin-off series just to kind of, help hype it up and see if kids like this concept of accompanying coloring and activity books to help them get interested and excited about science and spelling and colors. I just wanted to do something too for my own mental health this year to keep myself busy because I used to work like 80 to 100 hours a week. I want to help stay sober.
Hmm.
I want to keep my mind busy and still feel like I'm involved in the community because that's why I went into medicine. I wanted to help people and be involved. And so if I'm sitting around doing nothing, I'm turning 40 this year, then I feel like I'm not using my life or my time or my education. You know what I mean?
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
So that makes me feel kind of bad still. And I want to still help people and not turn to the dark side. So, in a way, this kind of helps me stay involved. It's not about making money or anything. This coloring book stuff is definitely not going to do that. It's just going to be out there. And sometimes, if I can afford to, I'll kind of donate to some churches or elementary schools or hospitals or things like that, when I'm able to. And then otherwise, I'm going to be working on my fiction and, just see how that goes. Because that's always everyone's dream. write a
Absolutely.
best,
Yeah.
write a bestseller.
Well, Cindy, thank you so much for sharing about your personal journey with Too Much and then about some of the other things you have going on. I'm excited for you and look forward to talking with you again soon.
Thank you so much, Sherry.
Thank you so much for joining me today for my interview with Cindy Lee Neighbors, author of Too Much. You can learn more about Cindy and her work at cindyleeneighbors.com. And be sure to check out our other interviews at InsideScoopLive.com.